Hey guys, I just touched one of the oldest things in New Zealand.
What, your head?
No, it was a rock.
Yeah, your head.
But anyway, it was at the museum, and apparently it's been around since New Zealand was first formed.
And when was New Zealand first formed?
Over 65 million years ago. It's all going to be documented in a TV series I'm planning called Jurassic Park Zero, the Sam Neill Chronicles, where Sam Neill goes on an epic crusade through time to destroy the time-travelling T-Rex, which
Stop!
is fought.
It's all lies. We must find the truth.
How old is New Zealand?
New Zealand, geologically, is sort of only middle-aged, really. The oldest rocks and fossils in New Zealand that we have are about 510 million years old. New Zealand was a little sliver of what used to be called a supercontinent, Gondwana land. Hundreds of millions of years ago, all the continents were gathered up into one huge continent, and then continental drift started and broke it all up into what we see now as Australia and Africa and India and Antarctica. And New Zealand was just one little sliver off Gondwana land that went cruising out on its own and made New Zealand.
So how old is the world then?
The world is very old. Current estimates say about 4,500 million years old, or 4.5 billion years old.
That's just incomprehensible.
It is.
So how did the dinosaurs die?
There's still some debate about that, but it now looks like the dinosaurs were quite happily living along, and one day, out of the blue, a huge meteorite or comet came down and hit the planet.
Bugger.
That's right, a bugger, as they say. It was like about 1,000 times all the world's nuclear arsenal going off in one place at one time. It was huge. It caused tsunami that were kilometres high to go out around the world. It caused wildfires that burnt the whole planet. Huge shockwaves that basically killed everything. And New Zealand was right on the far side of the world at the time, so you might have thought that New Zealand would be fairly safe. But in fact, we found in the rock a layer of soot, the chemicals that came out of that meteorite from outer space. And then there's just a layer that's full of fern spores. And what that shows us is that the meteorite layer from the explosion was laid down in New Zealand, and that you had wildfires, because the soot tells you there was fire in New Zealand, and the fern spores tells you that after this wildfire that burnt all of New Zealand, the first thing that came back was ferns, which is exactly what you see today.
So how did things like ferns survive?
Some things survived that impact. Some animals, some plants, the crocodiles survived. Little rodents, rats, and things that went on to make the mammals, all the mammals today, they survived because they were small, they were scavengers, they just went round and ate all the dead dinosaurs and things. But about 70 or 80% of all the animals living on Earth were killed.
So do you find all that information out from just digging around in the dirt and looking at fossils and stuff?
That's what geologists and paleontologists have done, yeah. And a lot of the information we find is useful. It can tell us how often earthquakes happen. It can tell us how often there are big volcanic eruptions, or it can tell us where to find oil. So fossils are useful for all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, I think all paleontologists are fascinated by life and the history of life on this planet.
What are you doing?
I'm just writing my work.
Why?
I'm writing it so that people know I want to be fossilised.
Okay, well...
No, it sounds silly, but I want to be fossilised because we've learned so much from the dinosaurs. I want people to learn that much from, us.
It's very nice of you, but actually it's not that easy to be fossilised.
This just looks like seashells and mud. How old are they?
They're about 500,000 years old, 500,000 years old.
Wow.
Really?
They look like they could have just washed up just now.
They do. But if we look at these seashells now, these are things like, say, the bluff oyster today. But those things live several kilometres offshore, out in quite deep water. But they tell you that at some point, this was several kilometres offshore. These are actually geologically young. I mean, 500,000 years sounds like huge, but actually geologically it's nothing. And so many of these species that are fossil here are still living today out in the sea.
There are all these layers. What can you actually tell from them?
These layers of rock are called strata, that's what geologists call them. And the strata are like the pages of, say, the Earth's diary. They're like the pages of the diary. As you go down through the strata, it's like opening pages down through the diary and looking back through the history of the Earth. And that's what all the different layers tell us things about what the Earth was like when that layer of rock was laid down.
What is it?
This is a very funny little snail, but the important thing about this little snail is that it lives today only in subtropical water, and it's found off north of New Zealand. So what this means is that when these fossils were laid down, clearly the sea was warmer than it is today, because you won't find any subtropical snails out there now.
Subtropical snail.
A subtropical snail.
So what exactly is a fossil?
A fossil is anything that is a remains of an animal or plant that's been preserved in rock. The animal or plant dies, it falls into sand and mud, and over long periods of time it gets slowly buried by new layers of sand and mud, and eventually that whole lot, because of the weight of sand and mud being deposited on top, the whole lot gets turned into rock. And then over more time, because of earthquakes and so on, it might get pushed up and exposed on land.
Why are fossil shells not everywhere?
Basically, to get any fossil, the animal or plant has to be buried quite quickly before other living animals can come along and eat it, or before they get broken up by the action of waves and storms and things. And also, the chemical environment of the rock has to be such that they don't get dissolved. Everything is trying to destroy fossils. Only tiny, tiny, tiny part of all the animals and plants that lived have been turned into fossils, so every fossil is really a little miracle.
For things that you say are little miracles, you kind of just pick them out, chuck them on the ground.
Well, yes.
You don't treat miracles too well, do you, James?
Casual with miracles.
Fossilization is not something you should take lightly. It actually requires very special conditions, no oxygen or acid getting through, and no movement for millions of years. And it also works better if you're buried alive.
Oh.
Hey, I can offer an alternative. I could run you over, and then the tar on the road can help you with the fossilization process. Because I will.
Thanks.
No? Are you sure?
I'm fine, okay? I've kind of changed my mind. It's fine.
The thing is, the further back you go through time in the layers of strata, the fossils you find become less and less and less like things that we live today. An obvious example is if you go back 60 million years, which is a long way,
Dinosaurs.
you come to the dinosaurs, right?
So did we have dinosaurs in New Zealand?
Oh, yes. Yep. But we don't find many of them, and the reason we only find a few is because New Zealand doesn't have many of the right sort of rocks to find dinosaur fossils in. But we do have some dinosaurs. We have small relatives of Tyrannosaurus. Yeah.
So when you say dinosaurs, you don't mean some kind of geological thing that is a dinosaur, but was like it was actually like a T-Rex.
It was actually like a T-Rex, so a thing on two legs, maybe 5 meters long. It ran around eating other smaller dinosaurs. So they were here. We know that.
That's awesome.
They were found by an amateur woman called Joan Whiffen. She found New Zealand's original dinosaurs,
When?
fossil dinosaurs.
When did she find them?
Back in the 70s.
Oh, so not that long ago at
No,
all.
not that long ago. And to find them, it's hard work. I mean, she'd find these bits of bone in this incredibly hard rock. I mean, the rocks up there, because they're much older, these are soft rocks. The rocks you find dinosaurs in are really hard. And her colleagues, they would put the rocks in acid. It had to be quite weak acid, otherwise you just eat the bone away as well. And then once every week or so you take it out, you'd wash it for a week to get rid of all the acid, then you'd coat the bit of bone that was exposed with a special stuff to protect, then you put it back in the acid, and the bone would slowly be exposed, and sometimes it takes years.
Speaking of years, you said you can help us get to grips with geological time.
That is the start of the Earth, 4.5 billion years ago. We're going to march through time. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick. This is the first appearance of life. Make like an amoeba. That's your job, not mine.
How do amoebas make like?
You know, you were being a good amoeba. And so we're just marching through a huge, unimaginable amount of time. And there's nothing but little single-celled amoeba. And slowly other things start to appear. Somewhere around here, things like little crabs and little trilobites and all sorts of little things start crawling around. But there's nothing with a backbone. And then slowly things with a backbone start appearing somewhere here. Now that's quite an exciting line, but before we explain that one, let's draw another one here. Now this interval, who knows what this interval is?
Dinosaurs.
That's right, this is the age of the dinosaurs. Then something terrible happened.
Oh, shivers, you killed us.
That is the meteorite. Dinosaurs gone, history. And so what begins here is the age of the mammals. And initially there's just little ratty-like things. So Ratty and his mates, and they all come along here. And you see we're almost back to the start. We're running out of time here, guys. And draw another line right next to our first line, our starting line. And that is the start of people. Yeah, well, sort of people, hominids. The first upright apes that led to us, that's just 5 million years ago, a mere nothing. And the first controlled use of fire and the fossils we've been looking at today are right up here. So just just the most recent thing in geological time.
That's amazing. It's actually,
It's nothing at all.
we've been here for just no time at all.
That's right. Humans are just very, very recent thing on this planet. We're the newcomers, the new kid on the block.
Okay, Polder, can you stick your finger on Auckland for me?
Right there.
Yeah, that's it. And down here is Wellington, right? So the scientist we were talking to,
James.
yeah, James, he was telling us that the distance from Wellington to Auckland, if you imagine that as like the time since the world began, so up here at Auckland is like the origin of the Earth, and down here in Wellington is like where we are right now in time. Then how long, the present, how long humans have been around for is like this big.
What?
Yeah, exactly, like this big.
Not
It's
very
like
long.
100 metres to be exact. That's like an Olympic track, you know, an Olympic sprint. How long an Olympic sprint is.
It's 50 basketball players laid head to toe.
It's like 100.
It's like a block, like a street block.
Like 100 small children laid head to toe.